Hello, everybody. My name is Frank Biermann from Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and I welcome you all to the 2020 International Research Symposium on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Goals 2020 Symposium. Our conference today and over the next 2 days is a fully virtual event. We have hundreds of registered participants from all over the world in all time zones. So therefore it is good morning to our colleagues and friends in the Americas, from Canada to Chile and Argentina. I hope you enjoy your morning breakfast coffee and you have a great time, and thank you so much for being with us today. Good afternoon to our colleagues from the African time zones and from Europe. And good evening and maybe good night to our colleagues in East Asia and Australia and New Zealand. Thank you so much for staying up a bit longer today and to be with us and join our discussions. I'm here today at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and I'm joined by a great team of colleagues who will all guide us through our first plenary sessions and the next 2 days. And I want to introduce 4 colleagues to you briefly, which are the 2 co-chairs of the symposium, which is Thomas Hickman and the second co-chair, Karl Ansenit, and they will both guide you through part of this open plenary and also the plenary program tomorrow. And then we have our conference manager, Leonie Grob, without whom this entire conference would not have been possible. So she will also be, and she will later walk us a little bit more through our program. And then we have Charlotte Ballard, who is not on the screen right now because she's our public relation manager and she has made the entire communication about this conference possible. Without Charlotte, you would not know about this conference. So she's here and she's right now on Twitter and right now on our social media and reporting about your research that you will present today and in the next 2 days. But then we have also a large organization team, and this team cannot be with us here physically today because of the lockdown in the Netherlands. So they're all joining in from the various home offices all over the Netherlands, partially also beyond the Netherlands, and supporting this great event. When we had the original idea to organize a symposium here in Utrecht, we had fantastic plans about beautiful locations that we wanted to rent out. We rented them actually for you. Conference locations with a fantastic place for a conference dinner, great locations for coffee breaks. We had plans for a very, very beautiful social program on the weekend in the canals of Utrecht. And we were extremely excited of hosting you all here in Utrecht, in our city. But then, as we all know, the pandemic struck. Corona came, COVID-19 did not allow us anymore to have any physical event in Utrecht. And we were very disappointed, of course. And we had to face very difficult decisions. Do we postpone the event, as some organizations have done? Or should we even cancel the event because of Corona, as some organizations have done? And we decided after long deliberations that the SDGs as a topic of research and as a political project is actually too important to allow our conference to be postponed by a year or so. And therefore we decided to take this entire program that we had developed till then and turn the entire symposium into a fully virtual online event. And we are very grateful for all of you to be here with us today and in the next 2 days to make this transition possible and to allow us to have this conference fully online, fully virtual over 3 days. Of course, there were also some very important advantages of having a virtual conference. The carbon footprint of our symposium is close to 0 because nobody had to travel. We didn't have to heat buildings or air conditioning was not necessary. So we have actually a conference that has 0 impact on the climate system. And this is great. And secondly, the conference is also much cheaper. The financial costs are much less because we didn't have to pay for travel. We didn't have to buy dinner. We didn't have to rent all these buildings. So therefore, we were in a position to reduce the registration fee actually to 0. This is a free conference with many fantastic presentations. And because of that, more and more people were able to join us in our discussions. But there is a downside, of course, that not being here physically in Utrecht, we're missing also a lot. We're missing the feeling of community. And this is very sad. If we had a physical event here today, we would have had a great coffee break before that. Or yesterday, we would have had a welcome reception in one of these beautiful locations. And there we would have been able to intermingle, to make new friends from different levels of seniority, different fields, different countries. So all this, unfortunately, is not really possible because we have a non-physical, a virtual conference now. But we thought about, we want to learn more about you, and also we want to give you a chance to learn more and see, in a way, the other participants. And for that reason, we have developed a Mentimeter activity that some of you might know from your own teaching activities, especially in these days of digital and online teaching. So we ask you just a few questions, and for you to answer these questions, you will now have to get your telephone or any other electronic device that works, and you go on the website, you type in the website www.menti.com. So you type this all in on your telephone or any other device, and then once you have typed it in, you have to enter a code. It's a unique code that you will find on this site when you click in menti.com. So our first question is that I would like to ask you all of, that we get a feeling about who is actually here participating in our conference. We have 800 registered participants, and today many of them have already logged in and are participating in this open plenary. So my first question is to all you, where are you from today? Where are you based today? So maybe you type in your country, where are you right now? Or if you're very close to a particular city, type in the city if you all know it. So just type in the place where you are based today. For example, the country that you are right now. Just type it into this interface, and then we will see. Good. So the code is 750455. Okay, it takes some time. I see 72, and I see many different places. I see London, I see Switzerland, I see Melbourne in Australia. Great. So this must be really very late at Melbourne. It's fantastic that you are here. I see New York City. I see Berlin, Ireland, Norway. I see Utrecht also. Good. I mean, you're very close. Thailand is here. Enschede, Zurich, many other places. Utrecht, which is a place very close to Utrecht, but we have also people from different locations, which is fantastic. So thank you so much, and it gives us a feeling about the community. I see Sweden is getting bigger, so the Swedes get to their phones now. I see Perth in Australia. I see Hungary. I see many other places, Bangkok. Fantastic. So this is really a very international conference. There are people from Australia participate, people from the United States are participating. I see Tokyo, I see Newcastle, I see many different places. Fantastic. But let us get now an impression about the background of the people. So it is essentially an academic conference, but on the other hand, we also very much want to speak to practitioners. We want to engage with those who are really in the daily life trying to advance the sustainability agenda. So please type in on the next slide, on the menti.com slide, what is your background? So are you an academic? Are you a practitioner from government? Are you from civil society? Are you an NGO activist? Are you from a city? Are you from business? Are you a student? So this gives us a feeling that, okay, I can see from a variety of places. So we have, of course, most of our colleagues are from academia, and that is not surprising because it is in the core an academic conference, but we have also consultants. We have civil servants from government. We have people from the United Nations joining us for our discussion. This is great to give us also feedback about the research agendas that we are working on. We have PhD students and other students. We have academic support, think tanks, so many different backgrounds are here, which are basic, of course, in academia, and this is also not surprising in our setting here. So let me now get back to the next question that we have, and this is about expectations. What are the expectations that you want to have from this symposium? What are your expectations? What do you want to take home from this international SDG Research Symposium? So please type in, and this is a Mentimeter question where you can type in a bit more text. So it can be one word. I see inspiration. You want to have inspiration. You want to learn about the SDG. That's what we all hear about. You want to think about the current state of the art, international context you want to make, and this is definitely part of this community, because we have also later some interactive games that we want to play. We have a fantastic pub quiz later where you can really make friends. You want to get new insights, and you want to learn to better communicate about the SDGs, which is very important. And we have great papers that are addressing this particular question. And you want to be best friends for life, somebody said, and this is very great, and we all join you in this. It would have been nicer if we had a conference dinner here in Utrecht with a couple of beers, but we will ensure that we try to engage with all of you and try to organize a symposium that will ensure that we all are becoming great best friends for life on the SDG side. And this will also certainly not be the last conference that we're having here on this topic. So after this introduction to our panel and to our conference, let me now start the content part of our symposium, which is the first plenary session that you are listening in now. And we have two presentations in this opening plenary session of the 2020 Global Goals Symposium. I will give the first presentation from Utrecht University and will sketch the larger picture and will introduce into the field of SDG research, but also into the structure of this symposium. The structure that we have also used in organizing the presentation. So that's very important for you also to find the papers and the panel that are of interest to your own research. And after me, Professor Pamela Chasek will join us from New York City, from Manhattan College, and she will give her insights about the issue of the SDGs and what is actually the transformative potential of the SDGs. So these are two presentations that we will now send you. And for both presentations, it is, of course, a bit different. You cannot shout out your question to us because you're not here. But what we allow you, what we have organized in our setup is that you can type in questions into the Q&A box of the Zoom interface at which you are now logged in. There's a Q&A box, and there you can type in questions at any point of time during my presentation, during Professor Chasek's presentation. And there's a certain democratic element in these questions, which means that as an attendee, as a participant in our webinar here, you can upvote questions by just clicking on the thumbs up button. So you can just click on it, and then if you like a question, click on it, upvote the question, and then it will become higher in the prioritization ranking. And it's more likely that we will really ask and discuss this question here in the plenary, because we can unfortunately not answer all questions because we have too many participants here today. And then for the procedure, again, we have the two co-chairs, Thomas Hickmann and Caroline Zenit. They are now busy selecting your questions, and they will read out your questions, the question that win the most votes later, and then Pam and I will discuss these questions. This is a procedure that we do for the plenaries. For the parallel sessions that start later this afternoon, European time, we will have a slightly different procedure. And just a final comment on Zoom. I mean, you're all probably in the last 3 months fully zoomed in and zoomed out, and you're familiar with the Zoom software. We have done the settings for this plenary session of our symposium so that you cannot see other attendees and others cannot see you. So it gives you a security and privacy because we have so many people here and we're streaming this all on YouTube. So therefore, importantly, we can't block this. You cannot unmute yourself because we have too many participants right now, and you cannot launch your own video because this is also not possible for this large setting for the plenaries. Again, for the parallel session that start later today and tomorrow and after tomorrow, we have different settings. So there are much more possibilities for you to engage, to ask questions, to join discussions. So it's a much more open process in the parallel sessions. But right now in the plenary, we do it this way. So let me now walk you through a little bit the SDG research agenda as we understand it here in Utrecht from the Global Goals project, and also as we understand it in ways of how we organize this symposium today. So first, the SDGs, I mean, I see them actually as the culmination or the current reincarnation of a 50-year trajectory of global sustainability governance that started at least in 1772 at the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, and then went through many, many different summits Many treaties have been included, many other policy tools and instruments have been agreed over the last 50 years, and they all didn't really fully work. We have 1,300 environmental treaties. They're not really leading to the results that we want to have. So therefore, in 2012 up to 2015, the United Nations developed a new approach, what is become known as the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 Sustainable Development Goals with 169 targets, all to be achieved by 2030. So this is kind of the current reincarnation of sustainability governance. And we are here today to analyze to what extent this new approach that the United Nations have come up with is actually effective. The language that governments have agreed to is extremely and extraordinarily ambitious. So if you look through the agenda for sustainable development, we find this great and inspiring piece of text that the governments are pledging that no one will be left behind. Governments are pledging that they are determined now to end poverty and hunger. Governments are pledging that they envision a world free of poverty, hunger, disease, and want. So the language is very ambitious. The statements are huge, and governments have really committed themselves, at least rhetorically, to a fantastic agenda. But on the other hand, the goals themselves are not very strongly institutionalized. They are not legally binding. Many targets are qualitative, so it's very difficult to really assess process. The goals are very integrative and cover industrialized and developing countries, and as such, they are different from the Millennium Development Goals that we had earlier. And they are all encompassing and cover almost all human activities. And that means there's almost no human activity imaginable that is not covered by the one or the other Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a huge agenda. It is goals that are very broad, qualitative, non-legally binding, legally institutionalized. And the big question is that I ask myself, and we here at Utrecht and our research team ask ourselves, will this actually work? Is this approach of non-legally binding, largely qualitative goals with 169 targets really working? Is it working? And we don't know. And because we don't know, we have organized this symposium. So this symposium is organized, it's probably the first of its kind, as an academic get-together of researchers, but also practitioners, getting together and studying collectively 5 years after the launch of the SDGs, whether this new approach, global governance through goals, whether this new approach is really working. Is this really something that the United Nations have come out that really will work and that will bring us forward on the sustainability agenda? This is a big question that we want to discuss with you today, tomorrow, and after tomorrow. And we want to do this in a critical spirit. So our own expectations for our discussions is that we hope for critical analysis. So this is not for researchers who are just supporting the SDG as such. So we want to be critical. We want to understand, does it really work in a critical spirit, but also in an engaged spirit. So we also want to engage with the SDGs and engage with the agenda and try to see whether our criticism can lead to a better policy approach. We want to look back at the last 5 years. Of course, this is empirically possible. So we can analyze the last 5 years, or the first 5 years of SDG implementation from 2015 to 2020. But we want to do this by looking forward as well. So the agenda for our symposium is also to look forward for the next 10 years and see to what extent the SDGs are likely, or to what extent do they have the potential to be achieved by 2030, the official target of the United Nations. The symposium has been organized largely as an academic research endeavor, so most papers are academic papers by people who are somehow linked to universities and write about these issues from political science, sociology, social science perspective. But also for us, it's very important to engage with stakeholders, from governments, from global activism, from business, from local authorities, wherever they are. We want to work also, we want to share our insights with stakeholders, and we want to gain new insights from stakeholders. So we hope very much to have also this engagement between the academic community and the practitioners community. And then this symposium is focused on the SDGs. It is about global goals, and particularly about the 17 SDGs. But we also hope to gain insights in a broader perspective, the broader perspective of global governance theory, are the SDGs, or is this approach of global goal setting actually a functional tool in global governance, or is this a mistake that the United Nations might have done and governments have done, and that other instruments are much better? So we want to engage also in a larger theoretical debate on global governance, and here whether global goals and global goal setting is an approach that makes sense. And for that, we have organized our symposium in 5 main streams. And these streams are guiding the program. They are running through our programs. So I have one slide for each of these 5 streams. These are kind of the questions, the key question that we want to discuss here at our symposium. Number 1 is maybe the key question, impacts and implementation. Can we observe really any steering effects of the SDGs so far? So we have many papers on presentations on that. Steering effects in the larger global governance system, the UN system, steering effects in the national political systems, in industrialized countries, in developing countries, and least developed countries. Do we find any steering effects in subnational political systems, in provinces, regions, in cities, in local communities? Is there anything changing because of the SDGs since 2015? Do we find impacts in companies, businesses, in civil society, universities, communities, and many other non-state actor networks? Where in these communities can we really see change because of the SDGs since 2015? So this is one core question that a lot of papers today are discussing. And then we have these SDGs, 17 of them, and they have 169 targets, and they cover more or less the entire range of human activity. So here, one of the key questions that many of us are asking is integration and interlinkages of all of these normative settings. So the idea was that the SDGs should align public and private actors around the ambitious agenda, and they should cover all countries. They should break up the silos of economic, social, and ecological policies and integrate it all into one big agenda, the agenda for sustainable development. But is this integration actually happening? Do we observe an integration of different policy areas because of the SDGs? Or is siloization continuing? Or do we maybe have even more siloization? So is it really the case that actors are aligning their efforts? And to what extent, and this is a key question also for our symposium, to what extent is any policy coherence, any advance in integration, is this linked and attributable to the goals that were adopted in 2015? This is one of the key questions as well. And you have lots of interesting papers under the theme of integration and interlinkages. And then inclusiveness is an issue that is very, very important also in our own research agenda here at Utrecht. The UN document in 2015 stated very clearly the ambition that no one will be left behind. This is a line that is repeated throughout the agenda, and it's maybe one of the most important lines there. The SDGs say that they want to advance in SDG 1 and 2 the interests of the poorest and the most vulnerable people. The claim is that the SDGs will help to eradicate poverty and hunger. But the question is this really happening since 2015? Do we observe since 2015 better inclusion and better support of poor and vulnerable communities within all countries? Is this really happening? And can we observe also at the international level better inclusion and better support of vulnerable countries, and notably of the least developed countries? So this is the question of inclusiveness, and we want to very much focus on this as well. So we have a conference stream of papers and panels that is looking broadly into the inclusiveness question, including a plenary session that will be organized tomorrow. And then the 4th stream is about the tension that we have between people and the planet, so to speak. So there were some discussions when the SDGs were created about the relationship between the planetary integrity, climate and biodiversity and these kind of issues, and social justice and social systems. There was a donut that many of you will know, where the claim was that we have the planetary boundaries, but inside also the social boundaries that we have to preserve. The wedding cake model that you see here, the idea is that some SDGs or some goals are maybe more fundamental than others. And the key question is here, to what extent do the SDGs lead to a change in those actors and communities and networks which have not been that much open for ecological policy so far? So do we see a greening of trade, a greening of economic policy, a greening of energy settlements and many of the other areas of human activity that has not been there before 2015 and that can be attributed to the SDGs? So this is the challenge of the integrity of planetary system and the big challenge of planetary theory that we want to discuss with you. We have a special stream just on this topic. And the first and last stream at the symposium is about research methodology and the indicators. Indicators is practically that we have a process in the United Nations system by which actors, governments, district offices are agreeing on indicators to measure process of the SDGs. And here the question is to what extent are these the right indicators? What indicators can be used to have these kind of issues? But also it's a question of politics, because the setting of indicators is not a purely technical issue. It's also about politics, because the indicators tell us what to measure and how to measure, and this shapes also the way how SDGs are being understood. So there is a political element in the indicator setting, and this is what we also want to discuss here at the symposium. And then finally, research methodology is very important. The SDGs are marked by a tremendous complexity, fragmentation across 17 goals, 169 targets, all these different issues were addressed. So just the question how to analyze this correctly and usefully, it's a big question for research methodology. It includes formal and quantitative work. So we have here fantastic papers on integrated assessment models, social network analysis, and other more formal, more quantitative tools. But also we have great papers here that are employing the qualitative and discursive research methodologies. So we have lots of case studies, discourse analysis projects, and others. So what we also want to do is to definitely include both types of families of research methods, but we also want to bring them together. So we're also keen of combining and integrating these methods and learning from each other, and maybe having one question with different methods being brought together. So this, again, is an important part of our symposium today. And just a couple of more generic questions that are also very much driving our own research agenda here in Utrecht, cross-cutting questions that are running through the entire research agenda. That are also a little bit linked to our own first research finding from our own team here at Utrecht. Number one is the question of causality. If we observe progress towards the achievement of the SDG, is this process really because of the SDGs? Or is it related to any other factor that can be also equally important? So that we have maybe a progress towards sustainable development that is aligned with the SDGs, but it's not causally linked to the SDGs as such, but linked to any other factors, economic developments, social concerns, public movements, whatever. Secondly, the path dependency is related to that. I mean, so we see maybe a trend in certain issues over time that started long before 2015 and is just continuing right now. So therefore, to look at this from the SDG perspective and to argue that the progress that we have now since 2015 is linked to the SDGs is maybe a flawed one. Maybe it's just a path dependency, a trend over time, and has nothing to do with the SDGs. This is also one of the cross-cutting critical questions that we have to ask ourselves. And then what many people are also arguing, what's very interesting, is a question that we find lots of organizations, actors, communities that use the SDGs publicly in their glossy papers, on their websites, in their speeches, when they argue that they are implementing the SDGs. So, I mean, in a sense, every larger organization has an SDG policy today. But the question is, to what extent are these policies really leading also to behavioral change in that organization? Or do we observe in certain places at certain times what sometimes is called SDG washing, that organizations just claim to implement the SDGs, but in fact they are not doing so and just claiming so, but there's no behavioral change on their side. And related to this, the question is also to what extent we observe variation in the implementation of SDGs, as some SDGs are maybe more influential than others. Is it possible that there's certain selectivity? There are certain SDGs that are extremely influential, powerful, and will be achieved most likely, and other SDGs are ignored, are not been taken into account. So this is also a possibility. So here the question of selectivity and implementation of SDGs is also a very important research question, and we have certain indication that this is actually the case, that not all the SDGs have the same impact and the same attention than others. And finally, bidirectionality is one issue that comes up in our own research, for example, that there are certain very, very powerful actors that might implement SDGs on the face of it, but at the same time, they might have also be very influential in creating the SDGs. So there's a process of co-evolution where actors are shaping SDGs and then are being shaped by the SDGs, which is all feeds a narrative of SDG power and SDG influence, which is actually not necessarily there because it's just not really a change in actors' behavior. So here also, this is one of the research questions that we are struggling with here at Utrecht. And I think it would be great to have some discussions on these issues also during our symposium. The last slide is a bit about the team that is organizing this symposium today, which is the Global Goals project at Utrecht University. And you will see all of our research so far in many of these panels today and tomorrow and after tomorrow. We are an international research team, 10, 12 people working at Utrecht University, just focusing on the steering effects of the SDGs over time and across all levels of governance from global to local. We are funded by the European Research Council, and we are very grateful for this support that also made this symposium possible. And we as a team, and you will see all of us in one of these settings in the next 2 days, we as a team, we are extremely excited to host you all this week for a full-time, full online conference. And just a final note about the logo that you have seen on our website, the logo that you have seen on the email that we are sending you. This is our logo that we developed because it shows how we understand, hypothetically at least, the SDGs, which we see them as like an orchestrator. So orchestrator means that we have a concert of actors, governments, private actors, civil society, and everybody is playing their own music or playing their own instrument in a certain way. And maybe the SDGs, because they have not any formal power really, maybe the SDGs can function as orchestrators for this huge concert of actors around the planet, maybe also like as conductors in a big concert hall, maybe also those who are writing the script. But our idea was, and this we try to symbolize in our logo, that we have these 17 SDGs and we have organized them in a way as a concert hall, as an orchestra, and we hope, and we will critically analyze it, but our hope is that the SDGs are able to have such a function and that they are able to bring us in the next 10 years forward to a better world, a better and more sustainable society. And this is the hope of the SDGs. We share the hope, but as social scientists also, we have to critically analyze the SDGs. And we are very grateful for all of you that you are here today, tomorrow, and after tomorrow, and to share your insights and your research and your papers with us to discuss these important issues. And this is fantastic. And we are extremely excited here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon European time to be here with you in your different time zones and your different places. So from my side, it is thank you very much for your attention. For a discussion, in case you have questions, I would very much welcome questions from you after this presentation. I would ask you to wait a second to type in the question in the Q&A box. We have one presentation coming up, and afterwards, the conference co-chairs, Thomas Hickmann and Caroline Senit, they will then organize the Q&A session for me and for the next speaker. And of course, you can also send me comments at any point of time at my email account and Twitter I have and all these things. And don't forget anyway our hashtag. The hashtag of this entire symposium is hashtag Global Goals 2020, and the place is Utrecht Uni. So this would be great if you all, those of you who are in the Twitterverse, that you're all kind of helping us to engage in these discussions globally for some time. But now I have this very special honor and pleasure to welcome here virtually, I must say, welcome in New York City, my friend and colleague Pamela Chasek from Manhattan College in the United States. So Pamela is right now based in New York, but she has agreed to get up early in the morning and to have an extremely strong cup of coffee to be with here and to give the second keynote on the first plenary session. I believe that Professor Chasek in our community of sustainability governance research doesn't need a big introduction. She's very well known after 27 years of research on all issues of sustainability. She is the co-founder and the executive editor of the Earth Negotiations Bulletin, which is, I think, the leading reporting service on United Nations Environment and Development negotiations. So if you have never heard about the Earth Negotiation Bulletin, Google it. It's really the key resource if you want to learn about negotiations, and Pam Chasek has set this all up together with others. And she has been a consultant for a variety of UN agencies. I don't read them out. United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. All of these international agencies have called upon Pam Chasek to advise them on their activities. She is the author of numerous articles and books in this field. One book, Global Environment Politics, is now in the 7th edition even. So it's really kind of very rare for an academic book to be preprinted 7 times. And her most recent book, together with 2 colleagues, is entitled Transforming Multilateral Diplomacy, the Inside Story, because Pam is inside, the inside story of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is, so here we go, kind of, this is what Pam Chasek will now present to us. She will present her vision behind the SDGs and the resulting challenges. So this is now Professor Pamela Chasek, Manhattan College, United States. And Pam, I would like to ask you now to share your screen and take over our conference. So now Pam is taking over. And please.
There. Okay, can you hear me? And hopefully everyone can hear me. And thank you very much, Frank. This is actually not the presentation I would have given 6 months ago. It was not even the presentation that I would have given 3 weeks ago. But what I'm going to try to do in 15 minutes is the following. See if this is going to work. There we go. So Carl Sagan once said, you have to know the past to understand the present. So in my opinion, you have to understand and know the history of the SDGs to understand them today. So what I'm going to try to do in 15 minutes is to look a little bit at the history of the SDGs, to examine some of the implementation challenges, and to look at today. We are in the midst of COVID-19, an global economic crisis, and systemic racism. And are the SDGs the answer, or are they something that are being put aside on the back burner? So as Frank just said, the SDGs came out of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. I will not go into the details of how they got in there. You can actually read about it in the book. But the future we want, which was the outcome of the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, called for the negotiation of the SDGs. This was not an easy task. They were supposed to be developed by the General Assembly. They were supposed to be universal in nature, both developed and developing countries. They were supposed to be action-oriented, concise, easy to communicate. And if anyone is familiar with the United Nations, that is very difficult to accomplish. They were supposed to be limited in number, aspirational, and to address the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. Many did not think this was going to be possible at all. How in the world could governments reach agreement on a set of action-oriented, aspirational, universal goals? To negotiate these goals, an open working group was created based on the language from Rio Plus 20, and they commenced their work in March 2013. The co-chairs, Macharia Kamau from Kenya and Saba Karosi from Hungary, decided to start the process by holding a series of stock-taking sessions rather than immediately jumping into the negotiating of the language of the SDGs. They didn't want to be caught up in wordsmithing. On this latter point, very few UN negotiations have the luxury of time to spend 8 sessions on stock taking. The OWG was given 13 sessions over 16 months, and the co-chairs believed there was sufficient time and flexibility to run these first 8 sessions almost as a university seminar on sustainable development. This would create a common understanding and a common ground. They recognized that this would be the most useful investment of time. Not everybody agreed with them. If anyone is familiar with UN diplomats, their goal is to negotiate, not to sit and listen to presentation and ask questions. But one of the ideas behind the stock-taking sessions was to depoliticize the substance of the debate. And this in itself is unique because the tradition of the UN is to do just the opposite, politicize technical issues. These stock-taking sessions were meant to educate, depoliticize, and create a level playing field. Both the co-chairs continually reminded participants that they were talking about one Earth, one climate, one biosphere. They didn't want participants to get carried away by the tendency to fracture the process along geopolitical lines or along substantive silos. So after the stock-taking process ended, there were 5 final sessions that were focused on elaborating the goals and targets. First question was, how many goals were there going to be? Some wanted 8 goals, just like the MDGs. In fact, a lot of UN agencies just wanted to make MDG plus and to just finesse the MDGs a little bit. Others wanted 12 goals, 4 for each dimension of sustainable development. Others called for 15 because it would be sort of cool, 15 goals in 2015 for 15 years. However, they ended up at 17. And no matter how hard they tried, they ended up there. I used to joke that there was a prime number problem. They didn't want a prime number of goals. But each time they tried to reduce the number to get to that magic 15, it didn't happen. But within this, there were challenges. First, they needed to incorporate the MDGs because a number of countries had not yet achieved them. And they didn't want to be left behind. That was the origins of this nobody left behind. Then how could this be an integrated agenda? This actually started during the negotiations because usually at UN negotiations, countries will send substantive experts, at least those that can do so. And those substantive experts will change chairs based on what topic is being negotiated. But because of the frequency of these meetings, 13 over 16 months, and the recognition of this need for integration, governments started sending the same delegates to every single session rather than sectoral experts. This actually happened as early as the stock-taking sessions. Universality was also initially quite difficult. Many developed countries liked the MDG model. Developing countries are held accountable while developed countries foot the bill. But as was demonstrated most notably by Joseph Stiglitz during the stock-taking, developed countries have these problems too. They're not immune, and especially with inequality. When Stiglitz said that in the US, 95% of the economic gains since 2009 had gone to the richest 1%, it really hit home and resonated with those in both developed and developing countries. Still, we ended up with 17 goals. And my favorite little story about this is that John MacArthur, who is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, put the number 17 in perspective. He called his mother, who is a pensioner in Vancouver, Canada, that all 193 countries of the UN agreed on a new set of global goals. And she said, that sounds terrific. He said, but there's one problem. There's 17 of them. And his mom responded, 17 is a great number because it sounded like they didn't fake it. The world is complicated. If they'd come back with a David Letterman style top 10 list, then I probably wouldn't have believed them. So in September 2015, after an additional year's worth of negotiations on the overarching agenda for sustainable development, the agenda and the 17 sustainable development goals were adopted in New York. Just a very quick recap. Goals 1 through 6 were really updating and enhancing the MDGs. All of those goals were part of the MDGs, but they were expanded and enhanced. Just as an example, the MDGs called for universal primary education, and the SDGs actually cover preschool education, primary, secondary, tertiary, vocational, and lifelong learning. Goals 7 through 10 move beyond the MDGs to cover energy, economic growth, employment, and equity. These were some of the most transformational SDGs, and they truly expanded the scope of development to include the root causes of poverty and inequality, as well as the interlinkages between the economic, social, and environmental pillars of sustainable development. With the exception of Goal 7 on energy, many developed countries did not initially support these goals, but developing countries said we have to look at why we have poverty, not just try to solve poverty. Goals 11 through 15, urbanization, consumption patterns, climate, and the environment, looked at the impact that humans have on the natural environment and how these have affected both social and economic development. Finally, goals 16 and 17, the final two goals, create the enabling environment for the achievement of the SDGs. And they were among the most difficult to negotiate. Human rights, peace and security, and the rule of law were new to the Sustainable Development Agenda. But the acceptance of Goal 16 represented a huge breakthrough in that it sent a powerful signal that these issues are fundamentally important for achieving sustainable development. The means of implementation targets in Goal 17 represented one of the overarching debates of the process. How will the goals and targets be implemented? What technological and financial resources will be needed, and who will pay? So now on to implementation. And I'm skipping a lot here, but I'm happy to answer questions later. So these SDGs were not meant to be just for the UN or just for governments. From the very beginning, it was recognized that you need action at all levels. That it can be, the UN, the international level, the national level, the local level, businesses, schools, universities, individuals, and families. So it's not just a UN agenda. Within this point, there's also the need to hold governments accountable, and citizens, including educators, young people, and even children, can play an important role in not only implementing the goals, but monitoring implementation. Teaching the goals to students and encouraging their support is really a vital part of this effort. The SDGs are also built on partnership. You need cooperation and partnership everywhere. The goals were created by the people for the people through one of the widest participation processes in history. Civil society played an important role in the design phase of the goals. And in fact, over 500,000 people participated through debates and consultations over the creation of the SDGs. So last year, when the high-level political forum on sustainable development, the body charged with monitoring implementation of the SDGs, they met at the heads of state level at the Sustainable Development Goals Summit in September. And during that summit, they identified a number of implementation challenges that need to be addressed if we are going to achieve these goals by 2030. Some of these challenges included that at the national level in a number of countries, there are not implementation structures. Local level authorities need support, not only to engage them, but to also enable them to report to their national governments. There needs to be space and cooperation to enhance the participation of civil society organizations. Also working with the private sector, engaging the private sector in implementing the goals and assisting governments and local levels to implement the goals. There are a number of systemic barriers, which should be no surprise to anyone. First is the availability and the reliability of data varies greatly from country to country, from even within countries. In some countries and some local areas, there is a weak capacity and weak technical know-how. There's the inability to access the right financial resources for implementing the goals. And finally, what some would say may be the most important is there's a lack of political will at different levels. However, one of the challenges that I think is the big one is, and Frank mentioned earlier, is this understanding of the interlinkages among the SDGs and targets. While countries were we're told that they could pick and choose which targets and which goals are most important for them. For example, if you're a landlocked country like Belarus or Paraguay, the oceans goals may not be your most important goals. You should not feel so inclined to implement all of them. But at the same time, implementing certain goals and targets actually have residual effects on other goals and targets. And by recognizing this integration, not only expands the possibility for implementing the goals, but also makes for more sustainable development overall. But over the past few months, something has changed. And what we're seeing, whether it's in the climate agenda or what we're seeing in sustainable development or in so many other topics around the world right now, the question is, can the SDGs compete against the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic crisis, and more recently, systemic racism for the public's attention? Okay, so can you still hear me, I hope? So what I want to spend a little time on is to show how the SDGs interact with these triple crises, and which I think hopefully will show the importance of this integrated agenda and how the SDGs can be implemented in concert with all of this. So the SDGs, in a sense, are perfectly positioned to address a global pandemic. The essential principles at the core of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda address this quite plainly. We're not to leave anyone behind. We have to focus on the most vulnerable and the furthest behind first. And what we're finding with COVID-19 is that the most vulnerable populations in our world are the ones who are being affected the most. The SDGs also call for embracing interdependence, that policymakers have to advance progress on social, economic, and environmental dimensions at once. And what we're finding with the relationship between COVID-19 as a health crisis and its interactions with numerous other topics, which I'll go through in a second, that our response to COVID-19 has to actually do this. And finally, developing unusual partnerships, which the SDGs call for, it actually opens the possibilities for a partnership, business, universities, civil society, and local philanthropies. And COVID-19 has demonstrated just how much we are of one planet. You cannot build walls and you cannot close off airspace to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And so just to show you a little bit, I'm just going to tie COVID-19 to all the SDGs. So COVID-19 has disproportionately affected people who live in poverty. We've seen a disruption of the food supply chain and challenges with wasted food while people go hungry, which addresses both SDG 2 and 12. Health challenges, obviously, is what this is, which is SDG 3. We've seen education challenges as schools have closed in-person education, and there's a disparity within schools, a lack of online options for the most disadvantaged, which is SDG 4. Women are being disproportionately affected, both as caregivers and because many of them own small businesses that are facing closure, SDG 5. We're told to wash our hands, but without access to clean water, that's not going to happen, SDG 6. A lack of reliable sources of energy means that hospitals who have to keep people on ventilators will not be able to do so, SDG 7. COVID-19 means SDG 8 is even more important because of the unprecedented job losses around the world. SDG 9, we could build back better and more sustainable. The most vulnerable, including women and children, people with disabilities, people of color, the marginalized and the displaced are being disproportionately affected, stressing the importance of SDG 10. Cities are also disproportionately affected, largely because of population density. And we have realized more than ever the importance of green space, cycling, and others, SDG 11. While we have seen a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions due to travel restrictions, that's not enough. But if we see people learning that we can have more conferences and do more, eliminate more business travel through Zoom, that could make a difference for SDG 13. COVID-19 deaths are high in places with poor air quality, but at the same time, we're seeing a number of governments rolling back environmental standards. And we also recognize that 3/4 of emerging diseases, including COVID, are zoonoses, and diseases that come from animals. So these address all of SDG 14 and 15. Finally, the need for an international effort to combat the pandemic ravaging the world talks right to SDG 16. And to make all the goals a reality, we need the participation of everyone, including governments, the private sector, civil society, and people around the world, SDG 17. In the past 2.5 weeks, we have seen a focus on systemic racism. And the SDGs are a plan to combat racism. Very interesting, and I'm not going to go into it in my presentation, but there's a lot of racism at the United Nations as well. And it is felt most strongly by those diplomats of color. And so the importance of having the SDGs address inequality, which in a sense addresses racism, is one of the challenges of sustainable development as well. But what we're also seeing is that all of these issues in the SDGs can also affect systemic racism, because as I just went through with COVID-19, issues like poverty, hunger, healthcare, education, women, access to clean water and sanitation, employment, inequality, living conditions in cities, climate change, the environment, and the need for inclusive societies. These all address different aspects of systemic racism. So the SDGs can be seen as a solution or part of the solution for that. We have to remember the SDGs are an integrated agenda that can address systemic racism as part of inequality, as well as addressing the SDGs, and the fact that this economic crisis is still affecting the poorest of our people more than the richest. So we have 10 years to go. And the question is, can we still have a decade for action? Can we still accomplish these SDGs in the next 10 years? Well, we can possibly use the SDG framework as a way to build back better after the COVID-19 crisis and the current economic crisis, according to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. These global goals urge us to address challenges in poverty, health inequality, and many other areas, while vowing to leave no one behind. But we need to remember that this is an integrated agenda. Expertise is important, but we need to get out of our silos and address the SDGs together, not separately. Anything you can do can be successfully framed to implement multiple parts of the agenda in a single plan. Governments need to do this, the UN needs to do this, and academics need to do this. Academics have been increasingly forced to specialize into smaller and smaller silos, and I'm urging you to become more general. You know, that if you want to focus on a particular SDG or one of the 169 targets, look to see how that also interrelates with a number of the other goals and targets in the process of examining it. So we have to remember, this is not just an environmental agenda, it's not just an economic agenda, it's not just a social agenda, it's not just a human rights agenda. This is an integrated sustainable development agenda. And herein lies both the challenge as well as the solution for successful implementation. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to both of our panelists for extremely insightful presentations. Before we move on to the first question, I invite attendees to refer once again to the guidelines for participation in the plenary, which are accessible by clicking on the link that appears in the chat function. And you can find this chat function in the Zoom menu bar at the bottom of your screen. So we've seen that Pamela's presentation has been very much centered on the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the SDGs. So we actually have a question related to that from David Kuhn from Utrecht University. So David is asking whether well, how do current and structural crises such as COVID-19 or systemic racism relate to our debates? Frank, would you like also to answer to that?
Thank you so much, David. It's a great question. I mean, there are two questions in a sense, and Pam has kind of answered them partially already in her talk, so it's very difficult to add. For the COVID-19 crisis, I think there's a good story and there's a bad story. Of course, on the one hand, lots of factors which are very, very important for the implementation of the SDGs are more difficult now. The public finances are down in many countries, unemployment is up, and the intention of governments and many other actors is now totally focused on the COVID-19 crisis. It's a very simple thing. I mean, when we do research now these days, and our researchers are trying to do interviews with any officials and say, can we interview you for the SDG? They say, no, we are all busy with COVID-19. So the attention is gone, money is gone, and of course, many other economic activities that are important for the SDGs are no longer functioning. On the other hand, there's maybe also a positive story, and this was partially in Pam's talk, that we have experienced now a tremendous range of activities of governments that have been unprecedented in many ways. Interference in economic activities, interfering in social activities, normative changes, also new feelings of solidarity among people, maybe in many cases, especially where I live, I've experienced this very strongly in our neighborhoods, a new feeling of belonging together and accepting also the need to change. I mean, we have changed so tremendously our societal behavior these days that maybe we can remember this when we come back to the SDGs, that maybe some of these changes and these new degrees of interaction and governmental steering can be also taken forward for the SDGs. And for racism is, of course, is a big issue, especially I see it for SDG number 10. This is the one on inequality, reducing inequality, leaving nobody behind is one of the key areas there. And this is one of the SDGs that we find in our research actually is not the one that gets most of the attention. It's sometimes forgotten. And I believe that the implementation of SDG 10 is one of the most fundamental parts of the SDG agenda, also with a view to racism. And I hope that this is the right way it will happen over the time.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I would like to ask and direct my question to Pam. And this is coming from Rob Raven from Monash University in Australia. Rob is asking about the SDGs. The question is, what can or can we not learn about the steering effects of international goal setting from the Millennium Development Goals? Pam, would you like to answer this question?
Sure. Can I just add one thing to Frank's answer from the previous question first? So with regard to the previous issue with COVID-19 and the SDGs, I'm just going to pass along some advice I gave to a friend of mine who is running for elected office, and she wants to run on a platform of the environment and the SDGs. And I said, well, most of her constituents have never heard of the SDGs. However, do they want good education for their children? Do they want to live in a healthy environment? Do they want to be in a more sustainable city? Most of them will say yes. And so that if you frame it around the issues rather than around the SDGs, you'll find that even with the COVID response, that it is addressing the SDGs and many don't even realize it. So coming at it through the back door, and bringing in the SDGs rather than going straight forward and saying, well, let's talk about the SDGs, and they'll look at you blindly. What are the SDGs? Yes, we need to raise awareness of them, but at the same time, many of the issues in there, from combating inequality on down are there. And those are the issues people care about. Now, with regard to the MDGs, what one has to remember is the MDGs were devised by a small group of experts at the UN agency level. They met in a small conference room, people who are part of the leadership of the UN Development Group, and they devised the MDGs. It was led largely by UNDP. And at the time, that was their agenda, focused almost exclusively on the social development agenda. In fact, as they were bringing the draft MDGs to then Secretary General Kofi Annan for his approval, they ran into Achim Steiner in the hallway, who was then the director of the UN Environment Program, and they realized they had nothing on the environment. So they quickly ran back and created MDG 7, which was never really measurable or effective, with the exception of clean water. So the SDGs, as being negotiated by governments themselves, which many of the agencies did not think this was going to happen, and they actually had some MDG pluses that they were keeping in their back pocket to be able to present and fly in like a superhero and save the day once the governments failed to address any of these goals and to come up with a comprehensive goal set. Once they realized that the leadership of the negotiations and the delegates were really on their way to doing something, they then climbed on the SDG bandwagon. But it took a long time. But with the MDGs, because of the way they were developed, it took 5 years before even the World Bank started looking and saying, oh, maybe we should take the MDGs as part of us. A lot of developing countries were very initially critical of the MDGs because of how they had been developed in a less than transparent process. So one of the things that was very important during the SDG process is you need to have buy-in from day one. Not only do we need to have everyone who wants to be involved in their negotiation to be involved, there was unprecedented participation of civil society, of UN agencies, of national governments, of civil society, and to be able to get off the ground from day one. There was an unprecedented launch of the SDGs. But the sad thing is that still, 5 years later, we're not quite where we're going to be. The last little piece of this is with the MDGs, some people were saying, well, if we don't get 100% primary education and we don't get 100% access to clean drinking water, the MDGs would have failed. So if you move from 50% to 85%, is that a failure? Some people would say that's actually a success. We have not actually completed everything, but we are on our way. And what I think we have found by setting goals, most of them are not going to be achieved. We see this most definitely within the biodiversity area, where the Aichi biodiversity targets will not have been successful. They expire this year. And so are goals worth it?
Okay.
I think they are, because they give you something to aspire to. And if you go back to Rio Plus 20, they're aspirational.
Okay, thank you, Pamela, for such a great answer. Steve Martin is asking a question on the role of the universities in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it can be directed to both panelists. So he's asking, how can universities orchestrate their transformative roles in teaching and research towards a coherent implementation plan through city, regional, and national interventions? Frank, would you like to start?
Oh, sure. I mean, originally when we planned this event as a physical conference here in Utrecht, we had invited the vice president of our university to give a roundtable discussion. We will do this at some point later. But sustainability is, of course, an area where the universities have to play an extremely important role. First, as a physical entity, in a sense, the way how we live and how we interact here. So at Utrecht, for example, we have banned the consumption of meat, which is one contribution of our university. So when we organize any dinner, and the dinner for this symposium, if it had been physical, it would have been a fully vegetarian and partially even vegan dinner, which is a measure that we do here at the university to move ahead in the SDG agenda. But then research, I think, is very important. And the point is here to leverage the strengths of the fundamental disciplinary research, to leverage this for a more interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach. And this is very difficult because the funding organizations, the career structures, and many other barriers are there that are still keeping us in the box of fundamental, not very much societally engaged research, and that are barriers for a more problem challenge-driven research agenda. And we have to work towards an agenda where science is more focused on the grand challenges of our societies, and the 17 SDGs are these challenges. On the other hand, without leaving the critical aspiration behind, and that's also very important for universities that are totally engaging in transdisciplinarities. Must not mean that we are selling us out to societal actors, in particular to corporations. So, but I think universities can be extremely important by changing their research agenda. And teaching, finally, it's also an area where I think the teaching of students in the direction of sustainability is tremendously important. There's one way of specialized programs, and we have this here. We have a bachelor on global sustainability. We have master programs in this field. But the question is also, to what extent are you integrating sustainability and the SDGs into the other teaching programs, the law school, or the engineers, or any of the other fields that are not necessarily related to that. And this is a big challenge, but we really have to work into this direction. And this means also for all 17 SDGs. SDGs is more than just having solar panels on your roof. It is about equality. It is about racism. It is about gender. It's all of these issues are covered by the SDGs, and they are part of the entire package. And if universities are adopting the SDG agenda, please take all the 17 SDGs on board, and not only the ones that fit into your existing agendas. The SDGs have to be transformative, and here universities can play a very, very important role. And we are working hard here with our university management to transform the University of Utrecht, and this is a vision that is also shared by our management, to transform it into one of the leading universities in the field of sustainability and teaching, research, and as a physical unit.
Thanks, Frank. Pamela, what is your take on this question?
I agree with everything that Frank said. I'm just going to add a little bit more on the teaching side, because I teach undergraduates, and I'm primarily a teaching school rather than a research institution. And one of the things we've been doing, and this is an unwritten article I've been putting on the back burner forever, but in one of my classes, what we do is we look to see the students choose which SDG targets and which interrelated SDG targets that they want to put together project proposals to implement on campus. And it's a semester-long project that has continued as students want to continue it after the semester. And some of the things that have come out of this, I've done it now 3 different times. And so, no, I'm about to do the 3rd time. But one of the things, we now have a Women and Gender Resource Center on campus that came out of this class. We also have eliminated the use of the sale of plastic water bottles on campus, especially at catering events. We have made sure that all of the printers on campus have the default set to 2-sided rather than 1-sided. We've done a lot, a lot of this sort of low-hanging fruit. We've also been looking at a number of other issues that are still in the process. One of the big things we're lobbying for right now is something that the Penn State university system has. They're much larger than we are, obviously. They have 19 campuses around the state of Pennsylvania. And they actually have one person who is a director of sustainability on the academic side. And they have someone else who is a director of sustainability for all operations. And both of them are utilizing the Sustainable Development Goals as their guidelines for what to accomplish across the entire Penn State system. And so I think we have to remember both to teach, but also, as Frank said, in the operations of the university and how we can reduce waste. That's a big thing. Actually, another big thing we looked at. One of the biggest forms of waste we found was when students move out of the dormitories, and how much of the clothing and furniture and things they leave behind that we could make available to people who are, we can donate them so other people can use them. And that was something the college had never even thought about. They've just trashed all of it. So we're looking at a bunch of different issues. I'm about to teach that class again in the fall. I don't know whether it'll be in person or remote, and we'll see what areas the students are interested in looking at the next time.
Sounds interesting, yeah. Now we have really many questions on our table. Unfortunately, for time reasons, we only have one final question, and this is the question with the most upvotes. The question is coming from Abi Unita from Utrecht University, and it's directed to Frank and Pam. The question is also related to COVID-19 again. So the question is, the SDGs are universal aspirations, but they're also implemented in a context where there's growing tension between nationalism and also globalism. This is becoming more apparent also, I think, in the wake of COVID-19. And moving forward, how do you see this tension playing out in the SDG implementation and the decade of action, which has just started? Up to you, but maybe you say ladies first. So Pam, would be your take.
Frank would be first. I think, while we've seen this uptick in a number of nationalist leaders around the world lately, and to the extent of one in particular, he who shall not be named, withdrawing from the WHO in the midst of a global pandemic, that we, at the same time, as I noted in my presentation, isolationism and nationalism is not going to solve COVID-19. And so, with the exception of a country like New Zealand, that has been able to successfully control COVID, and it is a small country with easy to shut down travel, versus a country like the United States, or versus the countries in Europe where there's a lot, borders have been fairly porous. And so, but shutting down air travel did not stop the spread of the disease. It was already in countries. Also, countries have to work together to resolve it. That if you have, people not cooperating on trying to find a vaccine, if you don't have cooperation on how to solve to resolve the disease, if you don't have cooperation with the people, it's not going to work. So I think, in a sense, that this COVID-19 has shown the importance of globalism. I'm not saying necessarily globalization, but the importance of global cooperation is really, really important. And that I am, the only hopeful thing that I can have is that some of these nationalistic focused leaders, that their populations will recognize this, should they have elections.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Frank.
I fully agree with everything that Pamela said. I mean, COVID-19, the pandemic, has shown very clearly again that global cooperation is key to resolve these very important issues. Nationalism is not a solution. It doesn't work anywhere outside New Zealand, I guess, in the COVID-19 case. And the decisions that have been taken recently of fighting against the World Health Organization, getting out of the World Health Organization, what the United States and other countries are, Brazil is also considering, this is not the right way forward. I very much believe that this emerging COVID-19 nationalism that we sometimes have, it is a period where we close borders, it is a period where countries are very much looking for themselves, but I very much hope that the spirit of global cooperation will take over very soon again, and that even global cooperation, global governance will come out strengthened out of the COVID-19 crisis. And the SDGs are very much an important part of this agenda. And I see positive signs. I mean, as usual, we are political scientists. I see negative and positive signs all the way. But I believe and I hope that the positive sides will overtake. Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Frank and Pam for your answers, also for your talks. We could have continued that for maybe 1 hour. We have more questions, but we hope that these questions can also be answered during the next 2.5 days. We still have 2.5 days to continue discussions about the SDGs and their steering effects. Now I would like to take over and hand over the floor to Leonie, our conference manager, and she will actually give you a little bit of insights about the next 2.5 days and also explain the house rules and housekeeping. So the floor is yours. Please, Leonie.
Oh, yeah, thanks to the 4 of you for this really great opening of our Global Goals Symposium. And a very warm welcome also from my side to all of you that tuned in via Zoom or via YouTube. It's great that so many people have been joining us today. Let me give you a short overview of what to expect the next 2.5 days. We have 3 more very interesting plenary sessions coming up. We start tomorrow with our second plenary session at 2 p.m. Central European Summer Time about the universal aspirations of the SDGs, together with Sebastian Traya, Sheila Oparocha, and Devapriya Bhattacharya. And then on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Central European Summer Time, our third plenary session is going to come up with John Thwaites, Imme Scholz, and Mans Nilsson about revisiting multi-layered governance for sustainable development. And in the evening at 6 p.m. Central European Summer Time, we are going to wrap up and look ahead together with Michelle Skilby and John Thompson. And of course, besides those, maybe also important to remember, all those plenary sessions can be streamed via YouTube. And besides the plenary sessions, we also have our 31 parallel sessions coming up with more than 100 presentations about cutting-edge SDG research in our 5 thematic streams that Frank already presented on implementation, integration and interlinkages, inclusiveness, planetary integrity, and indicators and methods. And we are very much looking forward to all your presentations, and we're very excited to get some new insights about what is currently going on in the international SDG research. And even though we only meet virtually, we still want to connect with each other. We want to get to know this big and huge SDG community out there. And we will also want to have some fun. So yes, you're all very much invited tonight at 6 p.m. Central European Summer Time to join our Global Goals Trivia Night, which will be organized by the Global Goals team. And I'd say just grab your drink of choice and then let's see who's going to master this fun pub quiz tonight. Further, tomorrow midday at 12:30 p.m., we're going to have our early career social lunch, which will be hosted by Sandra van der Hel from Utrecht University, Ina Möller from Wageningen University, and Jennifer Banzart from Potsdam University. And this session is especially dedicated to early career researchers to just interact with each other, to get to know your fellow peers, and to discuss on interesting topics such as, well, how do I pick actually the right journal for my research, or how do I connect with fellow early career researchers, and or how do I pursue a career beyond academia? So all junior researchers, but also of course everybody else, feel free to join tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. for our early career social lunch. The access to all these sessions can be all those sessions can be accessed with the password that we have sent to you yesterday in our last email communication. So just use the password and enter and click on the link that is also in the email, or just go on our website. You can access the sessions also from there, or just stream the plenary sessions via YouTube. Further, we have an important request to all chairs, presenters, and discussants. We kindly ask you to please be in the meeting at the latest 15 minutes before the start in order to set up everything. So a technical facilitator will be waiting for you, and he or she will be hosting the meeting and support you with all your technical questions that you might have. If there's further questions, do not hesitate to contact us. I think a lot of you already know our email address. Just email us at globalgoals@uu.nl if you have any questions. And of course, also very important, do not forget to tweet using the hashtag globalgoals2020 and tagging us at Utrecht Uni. And now I'm very pleased to invite you to our next program slot, which is going to be our first parallel session slot at 4 p.m. We're starting at 4 p.m. So I think everybody can just take like a 30 minutes break. And then I hope to see many of you in one of the 4 sessions, implementation 1 or implementation 9, integration and interlinkages 1, or inclusiveness panel 3. Well, now I do not have much more left to say than wishing all of you a really nice Global Goals 2020 symposium. Thank you everybody for joining today. It was great, seeing so many people tuning in via Zoom or via YouTube. I'm very much looking forward to the next 2 days, and I'm excited to see some of you in the upcoming parallel sessions. Enjoy, thank you for joining, and goodbye.